This is a magical device that, with just one injection of a substance, can perfectly access people's memories. Relying on this technology, the man sends a continuous stream of customers into the paradise memories he longs for, earning himself a fortune. However, a simple task to retrieve a set of keys ends up plunging him into an abyss. A mind-blowing, crisis-laden mystery is about to unfold. Due to global warming, the polar ice has completely melted, sea levels have risen, and coastal cities have been entirely submerged by seawater. To combat the Great Flood, the rich built dams, but these also isolated many poor, lower-class people. Yet people did not resist. Instead, they indulged in the beautiful memories provided by technology. Nick, a memory retriever, lives in Miami, now a water city. Here, the daytime heat is so oppressive that people never go out, and humans have become nocturnal. When night falls, the streets come alive with dazzling neon lights, and Nick takes to the streets to begin his daily work. Nick and his assistant Waz run a memory studio, a wondrous technology created in the new century. When the flood erupts and the world is shrouded in darkness, when the lower classes see no hope, technology has given birth to a machine that allows people to return to the past and enjoy their happiest moments. People lie in water tanks, their consciousness guided by a memory retriever, completely entering the world of memories where any past beauty can be experienced. Today, a customer arrived at the studio early. Waz relayed the customer's information, though his tone was laced with disdain, because the customer was one of Nick's former comrades. Having lost his legs in the war, the veteran had since fallen into poverty and had never paid for the service on previous visits. Waz found this thick-skinned behavior shameful, yet Nick still accepted the business. With the injection of a sedative, the veteran waded into the pool and, under Nick's guidance, quickly entered his memory. In this beautiful recollection, he regained his legs and happily played in the woods with his dog. The veteran experienced the memory vividly, and Nick was able to view it on a large screen. Yet after the session, the veteran still didn't pay, resorting instead to offering his last remaining dose of a drug called 8 cards as compensation. This is a new century hallucinogen that, once taken, becomes completely addictive, far more coveted than the once in-demand flower. Still, upon seeing the contraband in his comrade's hand, Nick refused to accept it and generously waived the fee. Waz, however, was left speechless and only expressed his discontent once the man departed. After all, at this rate, the studio would eventually run out of funds. It wasn't feasible to give free sessions to every friend. Fortunately, Nick's studio had been in business for many years and boasted many loyal customers. A woman named Elsa was a regular, coming in repeatedly to relive the same memory dream just to taste the beauty of her path. Seeing that Elsa was always trapped in her memories, unable to break free, Waz planned to send her a copy of the video file so that she wouldn't have to visit every week for the same dream. However, faced with Waz's kindness, Elsa refused, insisting that nothing could substitute for the feeling of embracing her love. After Elsa left, Nick picked up the keys that Waz had tossed over. Before finishing his work, Nick needed to store the memory chip in a safe deposit box because the dream state files were also part of the customer's vital privacy and had to be securely kept. Yet today was destined to be extraordinary. Even though the studio was officially closed, an unexpected guest arrived. A woman claimed that she had lost her keys and hoped to find them through a memory. Normally, such a problem could be solved simply by changing the door lock, and Nick had no desire to get involved. But under the dim sunlight, the woman's delicate appearance made him hesitate. Noticing his partner silent, Waz understood immediately and, with reluctance, powered up the machine that had long been shut. Sure enough, Nick agreed to the woman's deal. With soft guidance, she quickly returned to the pack, and her memory began to project on the screen. A seaside house. This piqued Nick's interest, for hardly anyone lived there anymore. Even the poor had moved toward the city side. The woman's room was messy and clearly modded. As the memory rewound, Nick finally spotted the lost key. During a backstage performance, while the woman was searching for her earring, the keys had fallen onto the dressing. With the task complete, Waz eagerly prepared to wake the sleeping woman. But Nick, entranced by the memory, did not. Instead, he wanted to learn more about the girl named May. Soon, May appeared in a backstage corridor, looking extremely nervous and scared. Then, after gathering her thoughts, she smiled and lifted the curtain before. It turned out that May was a resident. As her melodious voice filled the air, Nick became utterly captive. When the memory ended, May had successfully found her key, but Nick barely had any further interaction with, leaving him with a lingering disappointment. Yet fate, ever mysterious, had left him a key to another encounter. As May departed, she lost a pair of jade green earrings. Nick was convinced that with this token, he would meet her again. At that moment, however, Nick set aside his obsessive curiosity about other secrets. In addition to running his studio, he also held a part-time job at the inspector's office, where he helped extract dreams from criminal suspects for evidence, a use of memory technology originally developed during wartime. Although the border wars had ended, this technology still found applications, provided one obtained the necessary permit. This time, the police faced a huge problem. Selvin, Miami's largest real estate magnate, had amassed vast tracts of land during the war, becoming the true land emperor of Miami, someone notorious for his misdeed. The police were preparing to charge him with murder, but with insufficient evidence, they had to resort to retrieving his memories. Nick was brought in to extract those memories. Unfortunately, the opposing lawyer refused out, citing illness as a pretext to deny the police's request. And even after his own matters were settled, Nick's thoughts once again turned to May. He took a car and a boat to the submerged cup, and in a bar there, he finally met May while she was under the pretext of returning her earrings. Nick launched an approach on this woman he had fallen for at first. With his striking appearance and silver tongue, he quickly drew her, and soon May invited him to her place. Thus they established a relationship and began living a blissfully intimate. But on that early morning, as Nick and May exchanged loving words, the surroundings began to change. As May's voice gradually faded away, Nick suddenly awoke from the... It turned out that all of this had been nothing more than Nick's... Furious at being roused, Nick was... But Waz beside him repeatedly urged him not to sink any further into the past, reminding him that clinging to memories served no... Years ago, May had inexplicably vanished from Nick's, and his intense emotions had led him to become hopelessly addicted to May. He couldn't understand why, when they both loved each other and were inseparable, May would leave without a... Nick always believed that she must have encountered some... Seeing that Nick was still hopelessly pining, Waz, exasperated, remarked that it was merely Nick's wishful thinking. Perhaps she had only seen him as a passer. Now, however, he could no longer afford to be mired in despair. Over the past 6 months, due to Nick's negativity, the studio's business had grown increasingly. The neighboring Dream Workshop had stolen all the customers, and even Elsa, who used to come every week, hadn't visited for several months. They had been trapped in the Ishui district for years. Sooner or later, the dam would give way, and this place would become yet another submerged, at which point all would be... After venting about Nick, Waz revealed the reason for wait. Avery from the police had called with the newest, yet Nick refused to listen, relentlessly pursuing any news of... He returned to the bar from before, only to be thrown out by the owner, who insisted that May no longer work. He then sought out a former co-worker of May's, but received the same response. Nick once again entered a memory dream, hoping to unearth some clue. In his memory, he noticed a bruise on May's head. Though May insisted it was merely a work-related, the two climbed a high tower, confessing their affection for each. But as the alarm clock rang, set by Waz to remind him to head to the police station, Nick was abruptly frustrated and with no outlet for his anger. He suddenly heard urgent knocking at his... Thinking it was a customer, he dressed him, only to find no one. Suspicious, he looked around. Beneath the turbulent water, caught sight of a familiar name, identical to May. In that moment, Nick realized that May must have come to... He hurried to the police station and recounted the incident to Waz. But Waz suggested that it might just be a coincidence. After all, such earrings were plenty. The two then headed to the police station, where they encountered a suspect attacking an officer in an attempt to escape. Nick stepped in and subdued the man in 2 swift moves. Later, Nick met Avery to take on the assignment. Avery pointed to a man in a water tank. The man named Fox was a local addict and peddler of 8 cards, nearly dead from excessive use. Police investigations revealed that Fox had been working for a New Orleans gangster named St. Joe. The police hoped to extract information about the mastermind Joe from Fox's memories. Although Fox was barely clinging to life, thus waiving the need for sedatives, his will fiercely resisted the memory extraction, and progress stalled for a full 12 hours. Finally, Nick took a different approach by tapping into Fox's personal interests to trigger memories of a past party. Soon, the projector lit up, and Fox's memories began to be retrieved. Fox led them to New Orleans and successfully introduced them to the party's big shot, Joe. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly, but then an unexpected incident occurred. As the memory rewound, during a conversation at the party with the boss, a woman suddenly entered Fox's field of vision. Seeing the woman on the screen, Nick was utterly stunned. It was May from 5 years ago. And indeed, May's appearance had caught Joe's attention. However, unlike when Nick first met her, May now appeared even more alluring. Joe was deeply attracted by her and proactively offered baka. Initially, May was vehemently opposed to such contraband, but in order to maintain her image before Joe, Fox threatened her and her flattery fell disastrously short, leading Joe to pin her to the ground. Alongside Joe, some corrupt officers drew their guns, ready to take her down. After this farcical scene, May was completely terrified and eventually capitulated, consuming the 8 card. Outside the screen, when Nick saw his girlfriend, he completely lost control. Despite Avery's admonitions, he continued to relentlessly extract Fox's memories. As a new memory began, Fox in the dream saw May again, but this time, May was completely controlled by Baca. In order to break free from Joe, she stealthily stole all of his 8 cards right before Fox's eyes and knocked him out with a baton. Only then did Nick realize that May herself had once been an addict. After reviewing all the memories, Nick finally knew where to find her. He traveled alone to New Orleans, successfully met the gangster Joe, and pretended to purchase 8 cards in order to get close to him. However, in just a few words, Joe saw through Nick's identity. He knew that Nick was a former soldier now assisting the Miami police, and he immediately planned to dispose of him. After severe torture, Nick finally revealed that he was there to find May. Upon hearing her name, Joe immediately came to his senses. It turned out that both of them had been deceived by a woman. After May left, she had never returned. Thus, Nick's journey seemed futile. Yet once inside enemy territory, Joe would never let Nick leave unscathed. In this critical moment, Waz appeared from outside and began firing at a group of drug dealers. Ultimately, Joe was killed, and the two managed to escape. After returning home, Nick began to re-examine May. In his memories, he learned that May had once mentioned that after the sinking in London, she came to New Orleans, and from Fox's memories it was clear that May had left New Orleans with Baca before arriving in Miami. But having no money, she could only sleep on a boat. Later, while she was sleeping, someone cut the ropes, causing the boat to drift for over 10 kilometers. Had she not met Francis, who lived in a partitioned room on the boat, she might have already perished. In light of all this, Nick felt that May's first appearance was likely not accidental. Her getting close to him must have had ulterior motives. So he asked Waz if May had done anything suspicious the last time she visited the studio. According to Waz's recollection, when May came to see him, the two women chatted on the sofa. May, aware that Waz did not like her, recounted her own experiences, but Waz, dismissive and claiming he was also an alcoholic who had lost custody of his daughter, ended up getting drunk. Those conversations likely hinted at something May had done, and through a review on the dream machine, it was indeed revealed that May had stolen the key from the storeroom when Waz was drunk. After witnessing this, Waz remarked that merely stealing the key wasn't enough. She also needed the password, but Nick told Waz that the door was voice-activated, its command being a hum tune. Having spent so much time with May, she must have learned it by now. Clearly, May's motive in getting close to him was to access the safe deposit room. After further investigation, Nick successfully recovered the lost data. It turned out to be the chip of an old customer, Elsa. Clearly, Elsa's disappearance was linked to May. So Nick rushed to the dock to search for Elsa, only to unexpectedly encounter a girl. From the girl's words, he learned that Elsa, who had not appeared for months, had long been murdered. And after Elsa's death, she left behind a son, but he was taken by a red-haired woman. Since May is also red-haired, Nick became increasingly confused. He began to see less and less of the woman he had once shared so much time with. Based on the location provided by the girl, Nick went there himself to search for clues. However, behind a decrepit door, someone was hiding and attacked him. The sudden assault knocked Nick straight to the ground. When he came to, the attacker was already gone. Fortunately, thanks to the memory device, Waz was able to extract the incident's memory and identify the assailant. It turned out to be Bruce, the corrupt cop who had once mingled with Joe. Meanwhile, real estate tycoon Selvin died from a severe illness, and his property was inherited by his son. And when Selvin's wife and son appeared in public, Nick immediately recognized them as former customers. This revelation helped Nick understand why May had stolen Elsa's chip. By extracting the voice from Elsa's backup file, he discovered that the man in Elsa's memory was none other than Selvin, and it was evident that Elsa's son was Selvin's illegitimate child. Nick deduced that Selvin had hired May and Bruce to steal the chip, and had already murdered Elsa. Clearly, matters had spiraled far beyond Nick's control. Further investigation would be life-threatening. Enraged, Nick lashed out at Waz, firing him and ordering him to work elsewhere, unwilling to drag Waz into the trouble. To uncover the truth, Nick had to venture into the rich district, isolated by the dam. Once there, Nick sought out Selvin's wife to talk, but found that the woman was lost in a fantasy, her mind on the brink of collapse, unable to provide any useful information. At that moment, Selvin's son returned and discovered that after investigating his father, Nick was being set up by the security. Just as Nick was being dragged out to be executed, the tattoo on his hand saved him. The security guard recognized that Nick was a veteran, and facing an old comrade, he couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. Instead, he simply drove Nick away. But even as Nick left, he did not give up his investigation. Although he couldn't extract much more information from a few snippets, Nick learned from Selvin's wife the approximate hideout of the corrupt cop. In an abandoned building, Nick cautiously searched until he finally found the hiding Bruce in a room. Realizing he had been discovered, Bruce immediately lunged at Nick, and the two fought from the rooftop all the way down to the base. In the end, Nick managed to clamp Bruce's hand with a piano, and as the piano fell, it dragged the corrupt cop into the water. Seeing that Bruce was about to drown, Nick had no choice but to dive in and rescue him. After all, if Bruce died, he'd lose his only clue to May's whereabouts. But Bruce, once freed from his restraints, kicked Nick aside. Fortunately, relying on his strong lung capacity, Nick climbed out of the water and administered a hefty dose of sedative to Bruce. Once Bruce was subdued, Nick quickly hauled him back to the studio and placed him in the pool. In a dazed state, Bruce warned Nick that once he viewed a memory, he would never be the same. It was a curse that would haunt him for life. Yet with the truth so near, Nick did not waste a moment. He pressed Bruce into the pool and began guiding him through his dream. Soon, a holographic projection of Bruce's memory appeared. In his memory, Bruce arrived in Miami and successfully located the hiding. A frightened May mistook him for Joe's emissary here to punish her, but Bruce declared that he had already fallen out with Joe, and the burn scars on his face were indeed Joe's work. Now he was nothing more than a lone assassin, and his mission in finding May was part of a larger plan. However, when faced with Bruce's demands, May refused to cooperate, until Bruce threatened that, if she did not comply, he would reveal her hideout to Joe. After that, Bruce pulled out a business card, Nick's studio. Seeing this, Nick's anger boiled over. He couldn't believe that all the emotions he had invested were nothing more than a meticulously orchestrated scam. Under pressure, May agreed to Bruce's terms. She tracked down the veteran, the one who had lost his legs at the beginning, and, in exchange for 8 cards, hoped to learn from her old comrade about Nick's preferences, what type of women he liked, and what music he enjoyed. Watching scene after scene on the holographic projection, Nick nearly broke down. He realized that all of this was a trap. He was nothing more than their target. In fact, from their very first meeting and first date, Bruce had been watching from the shadows. To win Nick's heart, May and Bruce had meticulously crafted their personas. Nick eventually understood why May had been so nervous and tearful during her performances on stage. It was all a lie. And yet, perhaps unexpectedly, after spending time with Nick, May found herself gradually falling in love with him as well. But with no turning back, May had to continue with their plan, and eventually she stole Elsa's chip. One would have thought that everything would end there, but unexpectedly, Bruce's mission was not so simple. They still needed to completely eradicate their enemies. Shortly afterward, Bruce found Elsa and successfully murdered her. When May learned of this, her conscience finally stirred, and she couldn't stand by idly. She rushed to the dock and took Elsa's son. Thus, May wasn't kidnapping the child, she was saving him. Yet faced with the corrupt cop's pursuit, May found herself at a dead end. After years of hiding, she finally returned to Miami and knocked on Nick's door, hoping he could help. And that is how the story began, the sound of the knocking that Nick heard. Unfortunately, Bruce had long anticipated this and was already waiting outside the door, successfully intercepting May. In desperation, May could only toss her earring at the door, hoping that Nick would see it and find her. And when Nick came out, he saw May in a black sedan. Then Bruce took May to an abandoned building, where he threatened and coerced her to reveal the whereabouts of the boy. Suddenly, May's expression changed. She abruptly stood up and began a heartfelt confession to Bruce. It turned out that May was convinced that Nick would come for her, so these words were actually meant for Nick, as if two souls from different time spaces had finally met. May revealed that the child was hidden in Francis's partition room, a place she had only mentioned to Nick. After explaining everything, May kissed Bruce, which was, in essence, a kiss for the future Nick. Finally, she mustered the courage, stabbed out, and pushed the corrupt cop away. In order to prevent her memory from being extracted, she resolutely chose to jump off the platform. This sudden turn of events made Nick cry out in pain. His beloved woman was completely lost from his world. Enraged beyond measure, Nick unleashed all his fury on Bruce, determined to inflict the ultimate pain on him, forcing Bruce to relive his most agonizing memories, especially that devastating fire that had scarred his face over and over. After tormenting Bruce, Nick turned his vengeance toward the true mastermind. Clutching Bruce's phone, he returned to Selvin's mansion and, after meeting Selvin's son, revealed his suspicions. In truth, the entire conspiracy was orchestrated by that spoiled, rich, second-generation scoundrel. Selvin's wife had once said that her son was not good at sharing. Clearly, that was why he had hired hitmen, fearing that his status and wealth would be divided by this illegitimate child of unknown origin. Faced with Nick's accusations, the boy flatly denied it, but Nick immediately dialed the number on Bruce's phone. Sure enough, little Selvin's phone rang. In the end, Nick handed the evidence over to the police. This vast business empire finally crumbled, and the hidden boy was rescued. After all was done, Nick sank into the pool, day after day, immersed in memories of May.